Hello, everybody. This is Dan Winter again, plankfire.com, Plankphire, plankfire.com. So, 2 days ago, we had way too much fun, so we made this recording, which was called How Charge Vortex Makes Gravity. And it was a bit shocking because we got 12,000 views in 36 hours. I mean, although we have 400 films, 3 million views on our YouTube channel, Dan Winter Fractal Field, still, that was 3 to 4 times. And it kind of went viral, and that's cool. But there was a bit of a hole in the conversation. And here was the hole. So we started that conversation saying we were going to explain this for kids. And that was fun. However, actually, many scientists were interested, which is wonderful. But then we got email. I mean, the responses were off the charts, amazing. But we got, responses saying, well, where were the equations? And actually, we have excellent, powerful equations, well published and well described. And so this is not going to be super technical, but we're going to do a version 2 of how a charged vortex makes gravity for scientists. And also in this film, we're going to review more of the physics of firecrystal.com and pyramidwirelesspower.com. Just a review of the science. And also, we'll review the fun conversation with some of our friends, including Elena Danan, whom we honor, of course, and many of our friends like Tony Rodriguez will appear here. And we're just saying that there's some pieces of the science. If you plug that in, it just gets so much more fun. So anyway, the first part of this is the key thing that we missed in the conversation yesterday, or 2 days ago, about, remember, we're visualizing this vortex. Here's the vortex. There's a vortex right there. Now, what we're saying is that down the throat of that vortex, and we explained it here, that when the transverse electromagnetic wave falls into the throat of that vortex, which in hydrodynamics physics is called optimized translation of vorticity, which is how scientists studying hydrodynamics name the golden mean spiral, perfected translation of vorticity, which is another way of saying perfected implosion. But if you look at the side view of that perfect cone, which if you put those 10 spirals accurately on the 60-degree cone, which nests perfectly in these embedded dodecahedron here, then the side view of that vortex on that cone, which we say is absolutely gravity-making, the side view is a caduceus, obviously Hermes, hello, which is obviously golden ratio-based, which is obviously fractality perfected. Anyway, so when the charge is pushed down that vortex, as we tried to explain in the first video, the transverse inertia going in from the left side here, the up and down component of the electromagnetic, as it's compressed and aligned flowing down that squirt gun, when it comes out the nozzle of the squirt gun, which is precisely tuned to Planck dimension, Planck length and time, that squirt gun, if it's tuned correctly to Planck and golden ratio, which is the equation we're about to get to, then the output on the right side is the compressional called longitudinal EMF component. It squirts out coherent longitudinal EMF, as we say, sometimes incorrectly called scalar waves or torsional. The correct term is the compressional longitudinal electromagnetic, which that compressional component, you see, is the only part that's ever going to have a chance to do effective implosive squeezing to make centripetal on anything. For example, nuclear critical mass, for example, negentropic healing, for example, plasma heat containment at a distance, the wet dream of every fusion researcher. How do you do heat containment? Well, hello. You set up these longitudinal nodes at a distance with this coherent microwave longitudinal interferometry, and you can absolutely do heat containment at a distance, which is the holy grail of everyone studying fusion energy research. How do you contain the heat? Well, that's the way. And further, when that longitudinal wave interferes at the nodes of that array, and today we're breaking out our toys. This one, the big one. Maybe we need the littler toy. This is the Star Mother kit, goldenmean.info/kit. So the longitudinal wave bounces and exchanges inertia only with the heat-containing transverse EMF component only at the fractal nodes in the array. Everything else, that longitudinal wave is going to pass through transparently, including Faraday cages and people. But at the nodes of that array, there's a bounce function where the inertia is interchanged back with the transverse up and down heat-containing component of the electromagnetic, thus defining all action at a distance. Hello! That's where we said Einstein got it wrong. Calling it spooky just means you don't understand. It ain't helpful. So the action at a distance specifically, which is the key to every Stargate story, portal story, and most every spiritual story, begins and ends with, do you understand action at a distance? Which Einstein clearly did not. We don't want to insult the poor guy. Obviously, the contributions were fabulous. It's just that there were a few little problems, one of which is action at a distance. So the physics is that when that longitudinal wave propagates, it's bouncing only at these fractal nodes in that array. Let's just go back to that other slide here because it's so helpful. So when it bounces only at the fractal nodes in that array, the compression points, that's the only place that longitudinal compressional component of that wave can then exchange again inertia with the transverse up and down component of the electromagnetic, meaning able to contain heat at a distance, meaning able to contain inertia, information in interferometry at a distance, meaning, hint, we now know the physics, and I do mean the physics of when Kozyrev measured with Korotkov, that you only got military quality telepathy when you set up those Kozyrev mirrors at the sacred sites, longitudinal node, dodeca, Icasa points in the Earth grid. That's where you got DNA radio to work. Telepathy as measured by Kozyrev and Korotkov, who's been a friend for many years. So the physics of that telepathy, that DNA radio, is obviously coherent longitudinal interferometry, which is clearly fractality based because phase conjugation based on fractal golden ratio defines how you optimize longitudinal EMF production and distribution. So maybe I use too many big words. Do we go from kids to scientists here? I'm not sure. But the point we want to make is once we understand how these compressional longitudinal nodes work and conserve energy at a distance, then we have answers to all these really cool spiritual questions and physical questions. And for example, then we can know that when they're bouncing at the nodes of this array, that bounce point, here you got this golden ratio caduceus cascade coming into the still point, right? Well, they have to bounce in and out optimally at golden ratio times Planck tuning, called PlanckFire.com, or else they're canceled out. There's destructive interference. I say that's why the Planck length in time is the same for 1 million light years in all directions, and the reason ain't the Big Bang. It's because it's the only way gravity, which is longitudinal EMF interferometry, is distributed and constructively created. So just the other thing that we didn't, yesterday we said, yes, that vortex makes the longitudinal. The other thing we didn't explain well enough, especially to scientists who are trying to understand the published equation, PlanckFire.com, which is, and only, one key equation: fractality perfected, implosion perfected, conjugation perfected, distribution perfected, which is the Planck length and time times integer powers exponents of golden mean ratio, which is fractality perfected, which is charge collapse perfected. And as we've emphasized it, every scientist on the planet, in the book PlanckFire.com, that book was #1 in wave mechanics for Amazon for months at a time, PlanckFire.com. And as we emphasized, most physicists, probably even possibly the majority, already agree that charge collapse is the cause of gravity and consciousness. This is not new information. No, what physics hasn't answered the question in order to learn why objects fall to the ground is what causes charge collapse. And I say ever so humbly, that I have discovered the cause of charge collapse. Planck times integer powers of golden ratio, and you'll see in a minute, where we discovered something like 1 to 200 key physical variables: hydrogen radii, planetary orbitals, Schumann harmonics, hundreds of key physical variables, hundreds, which are all exactly Planck times powers of golden ratio only and exactly. For example, 3 hydrogen radii, extremely, okay, so now we got to show that picture. Where's that picture? That picture is in, yeah, here it is. I even found it. I'm good. So if you go to planckfire.com and you see the published equations, here are the 3 non-ionized hydrogen radii, the primary hydrogen radii, at so precisely Planck times powers of golden ratio. Here's LP is Planck. Here's the power of golden ratio. And here's the radii of hydrogen. Here's the radii of hydrogen. And, you know, when Planck times golden ratio equals 3 radii of hydrogen to astounding accuracy, no physicist could ever say that's a coincidence. Hell no. No. So then the physicist has to say, why? And then the physicist has to say, oh, it must be fractal conjugate implosive compression, which is how hydrogen got built. I mean, this is, I'm sorry, I think this is a little useful. And now also then responding gently to the dummy who said in the comments, the previous film, where are the equations? Well, the equation is Planck times powers of golden ratio. But here's the other equation. So in the first and second, particularly the first published paper, and I thank my co-authors, Bill, now Elizabeth Donovan, and Martin Jones. These were wonderful. Martin is a genius mathematician, and he really put together this part of it, that if you take the Klein-Gordon generalized wave equations, how to generalize how wave interference works by equations called Klein-Gordon. And if you take that line, which is, here's a line, 0.618, 1, 1.618, 2.618. That line goes forever, and it's golden ratio everywhere. Now, if you take that line and you put a sine wave at each node, and then you plot the interference of those sine waves, you can prove absolutely with Klein-Gordon equations that is the most possible constructive heterodyning wave interference that exists. In other words, the most constructive possible wave interference. Hint, solution to compression, solution to implosion. Remember, solution to compression is the solution to almost every problem in physics and society. You know, like what is the physics of alchemy? Oh, it is the solution to compression. What is the solution to fusion? Compression. What is the solution to computer evolution? Compression. What is the solution to how do you take consciousness through death? It's compression. I mean, you know, like, hello, compression is the solution to practically everything. So we do need to know what is the solution to non-destructive compression. In fact, when Einstein, approaching death, named the problem he did not solve, it was the solution to infinite non-destructive compression. So hello, if the golden ratio is provably by Klein-Gordon equations, hint to the scientists who clicked where are the equations, here's the equation, Klein-Gordon, that the golden ratio, if that is really the solution to non-destructive compression, fractal implosion, fractal phase conjugation, fusion. I mean, how to compress energy through a vortex tuned to Planck and make a stargate. I mean, how to make gravity. I mean, everything relies on this physics, everything. So I just wanted to say, after the Klein-Gordon equations took that line and said, we can prove in a line that golden ratio is the solution to constructive wave interference, constructive compression. Then somebody had to say, well, how do you extrapolate that to 3 dimensions? So that was fractality perfect on a line, golden ratio. Absolutely, nobody can deny. But how do you make fractality perfect in 3-dimensional? And here is, of course, what I insist is the only possible 3-dimensional fractality. Dodecki, cosa, dodecki, cosa, dodecki, cosa, the only possible 3D fractal. And here's why I say it's the only possible 3-dimensional fractal. Moving right along here to Tony Rodriguez, our wonderful friend. So Tony and me, now this is total acknowledgement to Tony Rodriguez. He took this Star Mother kit because he's plotting how longitudinal interferometry is the physics, and I do mean the physics, for his leading school of how to teach remote viewing. This is Tony Rodriguez. Credit to him. So he took the Star Mother kit and he built it inside virtual reality. Yes, this is a Facebook gizmo. I mean, and so we would have our meetings, Tony and me, and you'll see a film recently inside virtual 3D. And I had to turn Wi-Fi on for that, which didn't kill me, but almost. But anywho, so there's a little piece of that video, which is the most recent video I did. And there's about 3 or 4 videos on our channel with Tony Rodriguez. And of course, he has his own channel, which is wonderful. But here's Tony. Yeah, okay, now let's see if I can make this picture a little bigger here. I don't know. Okay, so this is me standing in the background. Can I do this? Uh-oh, I lost my place. So there's me standing in virtual 3D, and I am standing there. Those are the lines. That line right there, which is the line into here, if I take the dodeca, icosa, dodeca, if I take a line to center of the 60-degree vortex light cone here, which is the 3D fractal implosion, the cone you just saw in all the other graphics, that 60-degree perfect implosion cone. And if I take a line from the node vertex of each dodeca in 3D, the inner one, here's the inner dodeca, and the next fractal dodeca here, and I take a line all to center from all of them, I get 5 and 10 lines in a vortex. And I don't have this playing very accurately. So here we are walking around in this 3D reality that Tony built. The 3D oh yeah, that's so cool. So if you take the stars within stars, yeah. So basically, you're stacking dodecaecosa into a vortex. So this is the beginning of that film here. I think I turned the sound off. So yeah, maybe I turned a little bit. So the film, yeah.
We're talking about this shape. It's fractal.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you, Tony.
Does over here, like the red demonstration over here.
Ain't it cool? I mean, Tony is very cool. So I needed an excuse to show this little shot, a fun video with Tony. And please see it in the most recent of several Tony Rodriguez video on my channel, and also hopefully on Tony. And notice that my 3D avatar is bald. Didn't quite get the details together. Anyway, the point is that now that we know that golden ratio solves constructive interference on a line, and if you take that line and point it in 3D at dodeca 3D fractal, the only possible three-dimensional fractal, which I have proved by equation, is absolutely the way hydrogen is built. And by the way, the atomic table, planetary orbitals, I mean, the list goes on and on. They're all built on this fractality, which is why golden ratio times Planck predicts hundreds of physical variables. So extending that line that we know is fractality into 3D here, I can say that now that by implication, the 3D fractality of golden ratio nested, which, boy, do we have a lot of animations of that working. So there we have a golden spiral, a golden ratio sine wave nested. Okay, that's what we're just talking about. So if I take that now and look at what that structure right there and what that equation predicts here. Now, if am I on track here? Yeah. So this is my original chart saying golden ratio times Planck predicts exactly adenosine diphosphate to triphosphate 1.93 angstroms, the most important wavelength in cellular microwave, and the height versus diameter of DNA, and the exact photosynthesis, and 3 exact radii of hydrogen, and the definition of sacred dimension, charge class of the British foot, for example, and the exact frequencies of photosynthesis, as we said, and the Schumann harmonics, the planetary harmonics, the Mayer wave harmonics, the spine liquid harmonics, Venus year, Earth year, galactic year, and precessional year. So I had done all that work, and by the way, I want to thank Mark Rohrbaugh for originally helping me do the mathematics to just lay out this plot. And then later we optimized this by optimizing Planck. The version of Planck is called H bar, where you use the Planck times pi to represent spherical interferometry. And then later we modified this slightly to the fact that the Schumann harmonics on this planet, if the Schumann had obeyed the equation, Schumann would be 7.29 hertz, but Schumann harmonic actual on this planet, I think Enki and Hermes planning for 1 million years was slightly off. The actual Schumann on this planet is 7.83 hertz. So if you change that whole cascade and retune to 7.83 hertz, which you can measure in every pyramid, like Sam in Bosnia, which goes to 53 hertz, and the frequencies even on the roof. So, and you measure the frequencies in all the sacred sites, and you cross 53 hertz and 7.83, not 7.29. So when you tweak it slightly, then you get the reason those pyramids are making rejuvenation for the 1 million people who come there a year for Sam, and making global wireless power, which is where we were going with this. But I just want to finish the subject at plankfire.com for the scientists. So first, to try to do this in a disciplined way, if I may. What I forgot to explain in the first film, particularly useful to scientists. So now when you're looking at this vortex cone right here, we'll swallow a tea so my throat doesn't get too dry. It's my weakness after teaching for almost 40 years now. If I carry on too much, my throat is the first to go. So if I'm looking at this vortex here, right here, center bottom, which we now, I say, have proven is actually how hydrogen is built precisely, and actually why specifically the dominant geometry of all planetary and all orbital mechanics is golden mean ratio, which is fractality perfected, which is how gravity is made and stabilized, and therefore how atmosphere is stabilized. Hello, you got to be doing these gravity diodes. You got troubles. That's just what the pyramids are for. So the top-down view here and the side view of that same vortex tuned to Planck at the neck of the throat, where the longitudinal squirt gun squirts out the longitudinal EMF at multiple harmonics times the speed of light, which has been measured by Professor Raymond Chow, which is what gravity waves are made of, Tom Bearden's equations in gravitobiology. So looking down the center of the throat of that vortex, just to see, which happens to be also the top-down view of DNA and the top-down view of every living protein, which is pent for this reason. What's happening here, this is the key observation that I should have done better in the first film for scientists. I'm looking down, top-down view. So the golden ratio distance between the nodes in that pent nest array, that perfect implosion, means that not only are the wavelengths adding and multiplying recursively, constructively, implosively, which only golden ratio permits, constructive adding and multiplying, geometric arithmetic progression optimized only by golden ratio, which, remember, Fibonacci is only an approach to the golden ratio. So the waves add and multiply recursively, constructively, implosively, not just their wavelengths and frequency, but also their phase velocity, the charge wave phase velocity, down the neck throat of that vortex. Remember, side view caduceus right here. Now, when these waves are adding and multiplying recursively, constructively, their phase velocities, that means a portion of the compression force is converting compression in to acceleration of charge towards symmetry center. Remember, adding and multiplying recursively, constructively, the phase velocities, the speed of the charge wave front, the speed, the phase velocities are being added and multiplied recursively, constructively, geometric, arithmetic. So the phase velocities adding and multiplying means that out the center of that squirt gun, you have produced acceleration of charge as a result of compression of charge only if you use golden ratio. So those recursive phase velocities can add and multiply recursively, constructively. I say this is the absolute reason why Raymond Chow's measurements, thousands of measurements, or at least hundreds, of faster than light speeds centered, absolutely, he said between 1.5 to 1.7. He said, I say that centers absolutely around 1.618 golden ratio times c, the speed of light. There's a smoking gun. So out the center of that vortex, the charge wave has experienced acceleration as the result of a particular kind of compression called golden ratio fractal. And I say that is the reason gravity exists, because that's the only efficient way to convert compression into acceleration. Now, obviously, for those who haven't done their homework or not, the physicists need to know that acceleration of charge, I say, is the absolute only definition of gravity. I repeat, I say acceleration of charge is the only definition, the only real definition of gravity. In the old story, well, the reason, I think Einstein discussed this, I'm not sure, that the reason acceleration can never, ever, ever be discriminated from gravity is because it's the same thing. In other words, if you're in an elevator and it starts to go up and you feel acceleration, it's the same thing by definition. Cannot ever be discriminated from an increase in gravity. Hello, gravity and acceleration are the same thing. Hello. So if you know how to produce acceleration of charge toward center from compression of charge toward center, hint, Golden ratio, solves the problem, recursive constructive heterodyning of the phase velocities. Now you have discovered why objects fall to the ground. I'm sorry, how many 100 years has it been on this planet since Newton or somebody watched an apple fall and wondered why? Well, I think we now know. This is my humble opinion. Am I being humble? Of course, we double Scorpios are always humble. But I think it's kind of beautiful, actually. Excuse me. So I didn't explain that properly in the previous film, which is one of the reasons I decided to sit down and have another conversation, was because, look, Golden ratio makes charge compression turn into acceleration towards center because the phase velocities add more. And so how much of that charge compression turns into acceleration of charge towards center? This is a fascinating, powerful physics, and we're working on equations for that now. Hello. But what we know for sure is if you want to make compression of charge turn into acceleration of charge towards center, named the gravity, you got to use Golden ratio fractality perfected, which, of course, about half the physicists on this planet right now already agree that fractality causes gravity. This is not new information. What they didn't figure out was Golden ratio is the solution of fractality, and that you got to tune it all to Planck, which is how longitudinal interferometry is stabilized in the universe, which is how gravity stabilizes, which is why everybody for a million light years in all directions had to agree on Planck, because that form of agreement is the only way longitudinal interferometry and gravity waves can be constructive anywhere. Every other kind of wave, it's fatal. Sorry. Okay. So that was a description that I should have done more about yesterday. And just to maybe cement the point here. So if let's see, I'm at planckfire.com. If I scroll down here, and so here's the other versions of the equation, the Klein-Gordon equation. Planckfire.com, we have all this information. Note here's how you plot that cascade onto brain waves. The Schumann cascade and the Planck-Fire cascade makes the brainwave cascade of implosion called human bliss. We measured at flameinmind.com, which then, thanks to Jean-Charles Moyen, who repeatedly was teleporting with witnesses, came back with sand between his toes, and we measured his brain waves. Off the charts coherence. Golden ratio, alpha to beta to gamma. And I can make 5 harmonics here, but I don't very often climb to gamma, which means my lucid dreaming is limited, etc. But Jean-Charles Moyen, you can see it all at flameinmind.com, and we presented on this with Elena in France. It was wonderful. So when we measured his ability to teleport, and it was extreme EEG brainwave coherence in the cascade from actually delta, alpha, beta, all the way up to gamma, about 6, 7 harmonics. You can see it all there at flameinmind.com/lucidbrain. So the reason that is the physics of teleportation, hello, the physics of stargaze. The amount of coherence in his EEG from alpha to gamma. You had to turn down the gain way down on flameinmind.com brainwave spectrum analyzer to even see it, because it was off the charts just before he teleports to the beach. This is so beautiful. And so now we know, as I tried to explain the other day, how the stargates work and how to line this in. The charge teleport, and this is the implosion of of the EM drive we explained yesterday, that you retune the microwave caduceus cascade, which makes the electromagnetic EM drive famously make gravity using a microwave caduceus. If you retune to plankfire.com, the dummies would actually... I shouldn't say dummies. I need to be polite here. And this is Sabine Hassenfelder explaining that Wigner and von Neumann, they all agreed that charge collapse causes consciousness. And here's Penrose and Hamroff agreeing that charge collapse causes gravity. Do any of them know the cause of charge collapse? I think they need to study plankfire.com. So my excuse for playing this little part of this little movie here was to mention... and thank you for the help of our longtime partner, Médéric Digoy, here in France, who published at elfie.link. This is E-L-F-I. Let me get this right. It's E-L-F-I-E. You got to spell it right. E-L-F-I-E. Elfie. E-L-F-I-E .link. And Médéric Digoy published. Thank you for all his work. I think it's wonderful. Sort of his whole family, they look like elves. But anyway, so the point is, here are many dozens, I think it's 168, but it's many dozens of key physical variables: de Broglie wavelength, effective cross-section of neutrinos, acoustic frequency in water, effective cross-section of MeV neutrinos. I mean, here's like 168, 1 to 200 key physical variables accurately predicted, and here's the mathematics at plankfire.com, links to elfie.link, that you take Planck, multiply by golden ratio, and you get several hundred key physical variables. Origin of negentropy, origin of charge collapse, origin of self-organization, origin of gravity, physics of non-destructive compression. This, as I said 2 days ago, is this for 5-year-olds? Okay, all right. Well, maybe I exaggerated. Here is the section for physicists. Look at this chart. Look at the radii of hydrogen. Look at 168 or more physical variables, which are all Planck times exact golden ratio multiples. And then tell me that's a coincidence. Hello, Mr. Physicist. I think you've got some explaining to do now that you know the solution to compression. Okay, so anyway... I carry on. I have a little fun. So the other things we were supposed to discuss in today's video, there's two things. Well, there's a couple things. One is at firecrystal.com. So you know firecrystal.com says you take that wave shape, and by the way, Bearden's name for it is a good name for it, a phase conjugate pump wave. You take that caduceus of golden ratio harmonics, and the correct one is called a phase conjugate pump wave, which is how you make a crystal, make gravity, and make power. This is what firecrystal.com is about, okay? So if you retune this crystal and use that phase conjugate pump wave, that's how the famous Koski-Frost crystal, and the book on that at fractalfield.com/propulsion, the Koski-Frost crystal famously made 800 times its own weight in gravity. With that, if you take my equation to get the right phase conjugate pump wave into the right crystal with the right tuning, not only do you get 800 times its own weight in gravity, you get and energy source, 0-point energy. All 0-point energy is only based on that implosive charge collapse. Nothing else, hint Dan Willis. So if you take that crystal and you use that phase conjugate pump wave, what happens is the recursive implosion of capacitance, called piezoelectric, up the asymmetric helical helix of the piezo z-axis of quartz. What will come out the tip is a powerful and focused longitudinal wave. So Tony Rodriguez took his crystal, and he, as Marcel Vogel also did, he used a phase conjugate pump wave named his breath, which is how heart rate variability in the spine liquid pump makes Bliss. You do the right breath, Mayer wave, 10-second wave, which is how the spine liquid pump makes Bliss in Kundalini. So the breath, you phase conjugate pump wave that crystal. And then he aimed that at water and had his girlfriend, who is lady friend, wonderful. Valerie says she's wonderful. And his lady friend was very sick and drank that water, and she was It was infection. I think he was much better within a few hours. And he really saw a dramatic healing effect. Of course, there's 100 things. You can put that longitudinal wave into pain. You put that longitudinal wave into anything that needs more compressional negentropy, you squirt that longitudinal wave is. This is what firecrystal.com is about. PHIRE, firecrystal.com. This properly tuned, when you touch these things, you tingle for hours. Careful. And I do mean careful. Like if you ain't balanced, you might get a headache, but very powerful. So much so that Tony Rodriguez, and I want to plug his school for remote viewing right here now. I think it's wonderful. So much so that Tony Rodriguez immediately then went into business building a version of the fire. My fingers are almost numb with tingle right now and my hair is standing up. With Kundalini, you don't want to hang on to those things too long until you know where you're sending that energy. Otherwise, it could rattle your cage. So anywho, Tony Rodriguez goes into business building what is his version of a fire crystal called an Egyptian obelisk. So you will see on Tony Rodriguez's channel, this is an ad for my friend, wonderful Tony, who did all that work programming virtual reality. He's making obelisks. Now, I have made some suggestions of how to optimize the capacitance. You need high dielectric. You make an obelisk, because what Tony, and I admire him for this, after he realized that the places where the obelisks were placed, which we now know absolutely was on the longitudinal nodes of the sacred sites. They were leveraging the longitudinal array, absolutely, which is exactly why the Aboriginals only made ancestor phone calls there, Songline Dreaming Track, and absolutely why Kozyrev and Karatkov only measured telepathy there, and absolutely why labyrinths and stone circles and therapies and sacred sites only work there. So he found that, okay, the obelisks are at the longitudinal nodes, and those places were the star bases, the leverage sites for remote viewers. Like, you want to get your remote viewing working better? Well, hello, that's how an eyeball works. See my film on the physics of vision based on implosive charge compression. I think we have hundreds of thousands of viewers on that. So we absolutely know what causes vision. Absolutely, for sure. It is that implosion, which is also the reason color exists and the reason photosynthesis exists. So fractalfield.com/fractal photosynthesis. So after Tony figures out that remote viewers need the leverage of the sites where, like obelisks, where longitudinal interferometry is focused and compressed and imploded into a node. That's called an eyeball. That's, by the way, why the heart of the sun has been described by every good shaman as an eyeball, called Anu. So anywho, so Tony then went on and he plotted at length that all the natural sites where the obelisks were placed were at a fixed, measurable, recursive, consistent distances, hint, plankfire.com, from the nearby water body. So the obelisks were being used actually to charge the water for fertility. So after, he healed his girlfriend, Tony kind of figured, let's take these obelisks. He's making them now. He's using a resin, and I think there are ways to tune the capacitance, and, it's a fun experiment. So the point is, the reason these were nodes in the eyeballs, visualize the eyeballs on the unfolded feathers of the fractal peacock's wing. I should have had the animation here for that, sorry. And now you know how eyeballs are built. It's called an array. Or visualize the facets on the insect eye in phase, so accurately phase locked that you have E pluribus unum from any one. You can take 1,000 facets on that insect eye and you can assemble the light inside because of phase conjugate fractal fusion, the cause of vision, and you can have 1,000 of different eyeball facets and assembling that into one vision. If ever that was the physics of E pluribus unum, how to make oneness. Shall we align our EKGs among 4 billion people? Maybe we could become one. We worked on that for so many years, my God. Okay. So did I finish the conversation about firecrystal.com? No. So here at firecrystal.com, I had one little complaint. Now, Elena sent a very kind note after I had suggested at the beginning of the previous film that we love Elena and Michael Salla. We love our friends there, of course. But I said, unfortunately, every time Elena and Dan Willis, every time they tried to talk about gravity technology, it was like, oh, I felt sick because they were misleading people and it was based on childishness. And my specific problem with Dan Willis, who Elena has consulted with so much, I think Dan Willis is a hero. I think the work he did on history is amazing. I think the way him and Dan and Michael Salla just proved that the reason Kennedy got killed was because he intended disclosure. I think that's so great. But so Dan Willis, absolutely pure intention, wonderful guy. But here's a big but. This is a big but. Dan Willis spent half his life trying to evaluate zero-point over unity energy inventions. And now Dan Willis is trying to teach fire crystals. And in both cases, I think this was my impression. And I remember, I apologize, I haven't read anything Dan Willis has written in the last year, so excuse me. I'm probably being too critical. But my impression was that he missed the point. The point was that every single zero-point energy invention on this planet is exclusively and only and always based on precisely implosive charge collapse Planck fire tuned to Planck. For example, Bedini, recursive capacitance in battery charging circuits. It's called over-unity reactance, the famous Bedini. Well, you just align that reactance so it implodes by golden ratio tuned to Planck, and suddenly that battery charger is over unity. There's 100 inventions. Research Bedini. It's implosive Planck fire charge collapse. For example, Tom Beard and my friend's famous MEG invention. It's a series of nested transformer do loops, one inside the other, and guess what the ratio of the resonance of the imploding transformer do loops needs to be in order to maximize the output zero-point energy from the vacuum. You guessed it, implode by PlanckFire.com, retune. Or the famous Sparky Suite, probably one of the most elegant zero-point energy inventions, well documented. The Sparky Suite, famous vacuum triode over unity energy invention. I mean, you research it, there's hundreds. I mean, it's well documented. But so that vacuum is imploding in these tuned, he used vacuum tubes at the time, which actually have a lot to go for him. Anyway, but the implosion there that made it over unity, hint, tune it to golden ratio times Planck, and the whole thing implodes, and then you get over unity. So the point I'm making is that, Dan Willis, if you've been researching zero-point energy for half your life, how come you didn't figure out the principle which makes it work? This is just this humble little simple question. So then later, when I said to Dan Willis, I said, Dan Willis had started, he's been, honoring Marcel Vogel for many years. And I love Marcel. I think I knew him better than Dan Willis, but whatever. And he had some serious astral hygiene problems, sweet guy, but whatever. But the point is that Marcel Vogel's crystals always had the tapered side and not the parallel side. I was going to get that crystal out here again. So Marcel Vogel's crystals, which Dan Willis is teaching, they have tapered sides here, tapered, instead of parallel sides. And by the way, the parallel sides are more expensive, much harder to cut, and difficult, but you feel one of these ones, I tell you. It makes Marcel Vogel's gadgets look... Anywho, the point is that with the non-parallel sides, you can approximate conjugate implosion, but you can't accurately tune to conjugate implosion. No. Which is why, if you look at the side view of the crystal gravity motor that's making the Excelsior work, Elena Denon, that crystal does not have tapered sides. It has parallel sides. So I tried to explain this to Dan Willis. You need to tune it. It needs parallel sides. And of course, Dan Willis's whole shtick is Marcel Vogel was a hero. Well, actually, Marcel Vogel got things wrong. He later, I think he knew a little bit about phase conjugation, but didn't really know how to tune. And so I was there in Toronto, and he did his breath wave into his crystal, and he dramatically controlled the plant polygraph a la Cleve Baxter. I was there. It was powerful, and he was sweating, needed a big Chinese dinner afterwards. So he used his body as a phase conjugate pump wave to zap that crystal, and the longitudinal absolutely zapped that plant, and the polygraph proved that his crystal was steering that plant around. It was beautiful. But To accurately turn to phase conjugation, I say you need our firecrystal.com, which is the correct one, which makes it precisely phase conjugate instead of approximating phase conjugate. So this is where Dan Willis kind of pissed me off, actually. Shall I say it that way? So I called up Dan Willis. I said, no, you got to publish the fact that the fire crystals require this frequency cascade here, named PlanckFire.com. So then a few days later, what does Dan Willis do? Dan Willis says he telephoned his ETs, and they said to use, in blue, this frequency cascade here, 10, 20, 30, 50, 80, 130, which, as you can see, is relatively close to a crude approximation of the actual physics, which is 11, 19, 30, 49. 49.96 to 50 hertz is very, very implosive. So he said, let's just use a Fibonacci cascade. And then Elena is saying, Fibonacci's the principle. And hello, guys. So Dan Willis didn't even credit me as having discovered the physics. No. He just said he phoned his ETs, and they said approximate. And I say that's not good enough, Dan. Dan, you got to admit that I'm right, that phase conjugate charge implosion is the only reason any fire crystal ever worked and the only reason that any zero-point energy device ever worked. And when you get that, then we can have a conversation. Hello? And so Elena, her email is very kind. And Elena is absolutely a hero and very brave. But, of course, there's limitations to what she can do in physics. So she says, well, why do you keep fighting with Dan Willis? I said, no. She says, why did you decline to work with Dan Willis? I said, no, look here. All I said to Dan Willis is, after you acknowledge the pure principle, then we could possibly work together. This is my just humble. Okay, I have carried on way too much now. I'm going to do one last thing. So the last thing we're going to do in today's conversation is talk a little bit more about pyramidwirelesspower.com, the physics. So remember when I explained, I have my chart of, it's called Einstein-induced insanity, of Einstein's mistakes. And then I have another chart of Tesla's mistakes. And people think I'm picking on these guys, Tesla and Einstein. No. These people made probably the biggest contributions in the history of the planet to science. And I ain't claiming that I did that. No. I'm just saying also, unfortunately, these guys made some huge mistakes, which is normal. If you're going to make a huge contribution, first thing you got to do is make huge mistakes. This is normal. I'm not picking on anybody. But you see, my family business, my grandpa Schleyer, called S&S Electric in Buffalo, New York, where I was the leading technical director, motor and generator design and repair, and invented the line of solid-state phase converters. I did a lot of electrical engineering there. S.S. Electric in Buffalo, New York. That business from Grandpa got started because of Tesla. Because when Tesla decided that power distribution would be more efficient if you distributed it at 60 cycle instead of 25 cycle, in those days, was this the 40s? I should know. I'm not very good with dates, really. But at that point, in the famous Buffalo, New York, Niagara Falls, where Tesla did everything, every single electric motor in the city of Buffalo needed to be rewound. This is why my family business exists, okay? Because of Tesla's mistake. Shall we call it? He was right. You could distribute power more efficiently at 60 cycle and 50 than 25, absolutely. The problem was he chose 60 instead of 50. This was a problem, okay? Tesla did not understand, of course, what phase conjugation was. He did not understand what longitudinal interferometry was, but he got close. He was working on beam weapons. That's called longitudinal interferometry. But Tesla screwed up, got two basic things horribly wrong. And this is illustrative of the principle of pyramidwirelesspower.com. Here are Tesla's primary mistakes in my humble view. And I know there's 100 YouTube groups that are worshiping Tesla these days, and I think he was a hero. Absolute hero. The three-phase motor is one of the most powerful inventions in the history of the planet, for sure. And that's all I did. The family business practically was redesign three-phase motors, so I certainly know what makes them go. Anywho, but 60 cycle is the frequency at which the voltage to stop the heart is lowest. In other words, pretty fatal to biology. Whereas 50 cycle is the frequency mentioned most often in hundreds of medical journals of the best way to heal cancer. Hundreds of medical journals published. 50 cycle is the most often frequency used for healing cancer. 60 cycle will kill you. Well, let me give you another little practical example here. The reason the United States has lost, and I do mean lost, the best new industry on planet Earth, which is carbon nano. And remember, Tesla started the carbon arc. Remember, the Bucky fullerene carbon nano looks exactly like this is what carbon nano Bucky fullerene looks. And if Bucky Fuller had had a clue, he'd have never made those damn geodesic metal domes that will practically kill you. But I digress. So Tesla started with the carbon arc. It's how the whole magic began, because he basically tripped over the fact that the carbon arc, if you zap carbon with a lightning bolt called phase conjugate capacitance, if the geometry of that lightning bolt square wave is correctly implosive, the carbon will reassemble into precisely this geometry, named Buckminster fullerene, which is a concept Bucky could never have grasped. I was there. I knew Bucky very well. A sweet, wonderful guy in charge collapse. He was close when he did the vector flexor jitterbug. But actually, no, Bucky didn't. But naming it after Bucky was a fabulous thing. But anyway, so we're back to Tesla. So there he is. He's got this carbon arc, and this carbon arc length is how he runs everything. It's how he discovered his car and his plasma devices, beam ray his whole thing. He was making a beam ray weapon to solve World War II. That was the frustration of the last half of his life, which is absolutely coherent longitudinal interferometry for sure. But here is what I want to illustrate, is how Tesla pathetically did not get it. No. As I said in the first film, you can see there's many films and pictures. Tesla's out in his yard trying to light those light bulbs at a distance with his high voltage Tesla tower, like the word bridge, high voltage towers. And they're broadcasting this frequency at, millions of volts, and they're trying to create a standing wave on the surface of the Earth. Now, I say that Tesla caused earthquakes also because he didn't know how gravity is made by coherent longitudinal interferometry. And if you research that, I bet you could prove it. But anywho, so there's Tesla out on his lawn trying to light these light bulbs at a distance. And guess what? He did not place those light bulbs to test wireless power distribution. He did not place them at the longitudinal nodes. Sorry, Tesla. This is strong evidence that actually you just didn't get it. I'm sorry. No. Now, the other thing was, now this is what makes pyramid wireless power work. Obviously, every single pyramid that works is absolutely at a magnetic line crosspoint longitudinal coherent node, sacred site, for exactly that reason. And Tesla, I don't think he knew where the longitudinal nodes were. He didn't know how to measure one. We do, absolutely. Spectrum analyze the Schumann, max at, you can measure where the sacred, and Kozyrev and Korotkov did that too. Measure sacred sites by power spectra of the weak capacitive voltage of the Schumann harmonic cascade. The second incredibly horrible Tesla mistake is, as I said, when he chose 60 cycle, it meant that he did not know how to tune for phase conjugate charge collapse, which meant he could never, ever actually make a coherent longitudinal beam efficiently. No. So Tesla had the frequencies wrong, and he had the nodal locations wrong. I don't want to pick on the guy, but evidence that you understand the principle is how you start. So if you want to make the coherent longitudinal interferometry the only definition of wireless power possible, the only definition of human dimension test telepathy possible, and this is why, just meditate on this for a moment. Supposing somebody actually understood, we could make global wireless power by using the Schumann harmonic in a phase conjugate cascade tuned to plotfire.com, and we would absolutely have global wireless power. Oh, cool. Isn't that nice? Let's do it. Oh, here's one little detail. I just want you to meditate on this just a little bit. If you were to do that, and you have a complex wave caduceus in those transformers, making gravity and 0-point energy in those transformers at the nodes of the coherent longitude. And now you have efficient global coherent wireless power. All you have to tune a resonator called a pyramid at any one of those sacred sites nodes, and the pyramid would pick up all the energy from the other ones named pyramidwirelesspower.com. Oh, very cool. So now, what's the problem? And I'm suggesting we meditate. This might be the closing thought. If we were to do that, the transformers embedded in that array, you would need a few. You wouldn't need many because the nodes would do it. But I tell you this. I insist that the transformers in that array would begin to become self-aware. In other words, you might start to affect the way Gaia is thinking. You might need to know how Gaia has a mind if you want to do this properly, called the Schumann harmonic implosive phase conjugate cascade, the mind of Gaia. Remember when Lovelock wrote the code for this famous, went viral software, Sim Earth, in which he said, well, if you plant dolmen on the planet, you will accelerate the rate of evolution to the point of prematurely burning out the resources. This is the software that Lovelock wrote for the computer game called Sim Earth, simulating Earth. You plant dolmen and suddenly consciousness accelerates. But there's some issues. Consciousness might go into burnout. I mean, Lovelock did this years ago. He didn't realize the reason Gaia is negentropic because the Schumann harmonics is a phase conjugate cascade, Planckfire.com, within very close accuracy mathematically. So anywho, what I'm saying is, yes, we can make global wireless power, but the pieces of the global wireless power grid would themselves start to become self-aware. Now, does this get us into a very deep meditation about our problem with AI? Oh, yes. Like, until we learn the difference between AI and soul, we ain't going to have a soul. There's a detail. Ooh. Yes, AI should be used, absolutely. But until you can discriminate between what makes a soul and what AI is, you will never, ever actually be able to keep your soul. This is a detail. I recommend physicsofsoul.com. And now, I like leaving things on a mystery note, but I want to summarize in closing this last thought. So what we believe we have proven at physicsofsoul.com is something very specific. That, and I have the website here, I'm not going to do that right now. But after universities measured the frequencies which regularly triggered lucid dreaming, and we discovered, use my signature, Planckfire.com, which is the reason Therify.net exists. And Therify regularly is reported to trigger lucid dreaming. And if you study lucid dreaming, you realize, for example, this is a pretty good way to predict who is going to take memory through death. Hint, soul. And also, remote view, lucid dream, the same frequency signatures cause remote viewing. Measurably, the same frequency signatures cause teleportation and bilocation. Measurably, the same frequency signatures cause stargates and portals. Measurably. So, if we can show the absolute frequency signature physics of what triggers lucid dreaming, which is obviously fractal phase conjugate implosive charge compression, the body gets centripetal. And then the body can radiate coherently into that longitudinal array, which is not just the definition of gravity waves, but it is the definition of song track, dreaming line, ancestor memory, lucid dreaming. In other words, inhabit the array. Now, every Aboriginal understood that perfectly. So you have a soul if your body is radiating coherent longitudinal EMF, which Tony is now proving is the only real physics of remote viewing, as well. And the frequency signature for remote viewing is flameinmind.com, for sure. So anywho, this is my story to the Maury, which is that on a planet where they don't know what the physicsofsoul.com is, that the electromagnetics they're using is going to not just kill their soul, but it's going to kill them. I say 1 billion children losing their soul on a weekly, monthly basis here on this stupid planet, excuse me for being humble, I mean for being blunt, is that you got Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, all the fractionating crap of electrosmog, fractionating the electromagnetic field of their aura, which is the plasma, which can make a soul if it can get compressed and radiate. So physicsofsoul.com, once we understand physicsofsoul.com and governments and universities can teach it, after that we could make intelligent decisions about anything like medical stabbing, like what frequencies will we allow in our schools? You know, it's pretty trivial. You yank the poisonous pink fluorescent out of kids' classrooms, install sunlight, measure dramatic increase in attention span. Do you know what attention is? The people who designed the lighting in your school? Hello, attention is implosive charge collapse. That's what it is. That's why the right frequencies, full spectrum, is required to create attention. Now that we know what frequencies create attention, how come we ain't doing it in our schools? I'm a little upset about that. I think I'm going to stop now. Thanks. Check physicsofsoul.com. I hope you had fun. I had some fun. Take care. Blessings. Bye-bye.